Hey Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I've been following you for about 2.5 years now, and I have to be really honest. This is the interview that I've been looking forward to a lot, and you're the guy that I really studied to practice my writing skills. So it's great to have you, on the show, and talk to you about your new book, Perennial Seller.
Well,
And,
I appreciate that. That's very cool.
I was wondering, how is the online book tour going for you?
It's going good. It's on the one hand, it's not a chore. It's just you people get into writing to write books, and then you end up having to do a lot of things that are not writing books. Um, but instead of complaining, I always try to remind myself this is an immense treat to get to talk to. So many people sit down and they write things or they make movies or videos or whatever it is, and then nobody knows about it. And so I always try to remind myself that this is why I do what I do, which is to get to talk to people about the things that I've made.
And that's also one of the things that I really want to talk to you about because your new book, Perennial Seller, you talk about creating something that sells for a long time. But you also talk about the marketing and just doing this part that you're doing right now, right?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
look, my first book came out a little over 5 years ago now, and I still write articles about it. I don't think the point of writing a book is that it's supposed to last. I mean, if it wasn't supposed to last, you'd just have scribbled it on a piece of paper or said it to a friend. The purpose is to make something that lasts. And so it's always interesting to me to see authors or creators spend so much time and energy making something, and then they just discard it
Mhm.
almost immediately thereafter, because really they were just using it as a way to get a little bit of attention, or it was just I don't know what I think they see it as like a status symbol, not as something they actually believe in.
Well, that's a great point because that reminds me a little bit why I started following you. And most of my audience who follows me, reads my articles, and listens to my podcast knows who you are because I often talk about your books and how I'm influenced by it. One thing that I noticed is that you have a really high standard, and just what you just talked about. To be honest, even if I look at myself, that's not the way that I think. So I was wondering, like, where did you learn this? Is it something that you learned early on from your time with working with Robert Greene, or did you have this always, or how did it work?
Well, I genuinely love books, and I think writing is very important. And so I think a huge part of it is just being a fan and being inspired by these people who have made these great things. I want to make things like that too. And so I don't want to phone it in, because what I feel like these things are so important that to hold myself to a low standard is in some ways kind of a betrayal of that. So that's part of it. And then, yeah, working with Robert, I would work on stories for Robert. He would have me research things, and I would, he'd be looking for an example of a historical figure that had done this or that, and I would find things, and I would bring him, the first thing that I thought of.
Mm.
Uh, and I'd think it was pretty good, and he would say, this works, but it's not good enough. And so, watching someone, one of the things I've actually been disappointed with in my own writing is that I feel like I don't discard as many stories or research that I find. To me, that's evidence that I'm not holding myself to as high a standard as I even could. So just watching someone hold themselves to such a high standard helped, I think, give me some of my own as well.
But do you also think that you can go a little bit too extreme with it and maybe hold yourself to a really high standard?
Yeah, look, there. I think it was Winston Churchill who said you could spell perfection as paralysis,
Yeah.
and I think he's totally right. There is an equally problematic habit of obsessing over tiny details, or taking too long. At a certain point, you have to ship it. It has to exist and enter the world, and I think it's important not to forget that. But I would argue that most people have the opposite problem. Most people, the problem is that
Yeah,
they're
we just
not holding
hide.
themselves to any
We just
standard.
hide behind it, right? We often say, "Oh,
Yes.
we're a perfectionist," but that's often not the case. I've been there as well.
Yeah, we say we're perfectionists, but I don't think anyone would argue that we're anywhere close to perfect.
Yeah, that's one of those funny things that just looking for excuse not to do work or not to ship something. One thing that I also noticed is that when I follow the launch of this book compared to, for instance, Obstacle is the Way or Ego is the Enemy, I noticed, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like this is a little bit less, out there. Or you just send one email out to a newsletter, right?
Yeah, it's
Why is that?
it's a little more subdued
Mm,
for a couple reasons. So one, I don't think this book is for everyone.
mm,
I certainly would like everyone to read it, but I think I'm writing this book specifically for people who make things, whether it's
mm,
books or movies or uh, products that they sell, or they're a musician or an actor. It's for people who make work that they sell to people. So if you're an insurance salesman, I think there's a lot that you can get out of The Obstacle is the Way. If you're a stay-at-home mom, I think there's something that you can get out of The Daily Stoic. I'm not sure that that's totally the case with this book, and I think knowing who your audience is on a product is very important, on a project is very important, because you don't want to spend time and energy selling something to people that ultimately isn't going to deliver for them completely. And so I think there's a part of this that I'm trying to aim this at a very specific group. And then look, part of it is that this is a book that I'm willing to give some space to. I know it's not exactly a popular opinion to say that certain people are phoning it in or faking it, and that a lot of work is disposable and meaningless.
mm.
And so I realize that this isn't for everyone, and I'm willing to give it a little space to find who it is for. So that's part of it. And then look, the other part of it is I've released a lot of books in a short amount of time, and so part of it is giving everything some room to breathe.
Yeah, and maybe also that you don't necessarily need it by this point. Or I don't know, maybe you think differently, but by now I think if I look at myself, you've built the reputation, or not only the reputation, but the actual results your books delivered until now every time. And then after a while, you're like, I'm automatically going to buy his book just the same way that you're buying the new Iron Maiden CD, right?
Sure. I mean, look, I don't think I'm in any place where I can just simply coast because I've built an audience. I don't like that. I like to
No, but
start
more
from
we know that you deliver and that you don't coast.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
but I mean, I deliberately try to start the marketing on every project, assuming that
Mm,
nobody cares and that there is no audience for it, and then I have to earn each one.
mm,
But I do know that I have seen it happen enough times that if I've made something good and I seed it to the right people,
mm.
it will find its way. So I have a little bit more confidence there, and I'm willing to. I'm able to more confidently take it slow than maybe I would have in the past.
Yeah, I think also I think that's a great point because you have the confidence and you've shown it in the past. Now, can you relax more, or is it still like, do you feel that anxious, or every time a book comes out?
Yeah, there's always the nervousness. I think the hardest part on a book is the period right after it's sort of gone into production, like
Mm.
it's being made, but before it comes out. That's really the period where you're sort of just that's the test of your resolve as an author, because or as a creator, because there's nothing you can do to fix what you've made,
Mm.
but you don't have the validation from other people letting you
Yeah,
know you've succeeded, and so you're sort of just alone with your own thoughts on it, and
yeah.
that's certainly a hard spot on each project.
Do you still have the urge to go in and try to fix things, even though you know you can't do anything, or are you just at
I'm
peace?
I'm a I'm a fiddler, so I always want, even on Obstacle or Ego, I have notes on changes that I would make or will make if I ever get a chance. So
Yeah.
I'm always I'm all if you would let me, I'd keep working on it forever. But I know that's not a good idea.
Yeah, you just have to move on, right? The next project. That's also one of your philosophies, right? Every time that you finish a book, you want to have your next book lined up, right? Why is that?
I want to have it lined up, or I want to already be working on it.
Mm,
Because look, I think if part of the way that you insulate yourself from being too obsessed with how you do in your first week of sales or what the critics are saying about you
mm.
is to be already heads down working on what you have next. And so that's where I try to find myself, is that I want to be not I don't want my self-worth to be rising and falling on the next project, or on the project that I have coming out. I want it to be on whether I'm doing the work and earning it every day on the thing that I'm doing.
Yeah, that really reminds me, and the thing that I just wanted to share as well is that what I see in your books is that you apply the things that you write about in your own life and career. And for instance, when you talk about stoicism, focusing on things you control, I think this is a great exercise or a great way or a great strategy for people to, if you're working on a project and it's ready to ship, it's really easy to focus on things you can't control and maybe go on social media or try to influence things or maybe try to push some sales. Instead, you just focus on what you really control, and that's a new product or a new book.
Well, look, I do try. I do try. I mean, I think it would be weird to write books and then, not try to put them into practice. I'm not saying they're easy or that I'm perfect at it, but yeah, I do. I do. I find the satisfaction and the pride not necessarily in how the books are selling or not in what people are saying about them on social media, but on, do I feel like I'm making progress towards something, and am I chugging away day to day? And to me, yeah, that is always in my control, and that's where I like to focus my energy.
Yeah, and about creating a perennial seller. What I really noticed was when I sent out an email to my newsletter saying, "Do you have questions for Ryan Holiday?" And most people ask questions related to life advice or things about stoicism or dealing with obstacles, dealing with fear. And when I read that, I was like, "Oh wow, that's great," because when I look at the topics, it really gives a signal of that, those books really stuck with people. And that's what you're primarily known for. Are you okay with that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't really care or think that much about what I'm known for.
Mm,
I do try to write books that matter and have impact for people, that do what I set out to do when I was writing them. And I think with this book, what's different about it is that I'm trying to show, again, a very specific how to do a very specific thing,
mm,
right? With Daily Stoic or with Ego's Enemy or Obstacles Way, I think these are things that universally apply to all human beings.
mm.
Um, and I've tried to put the principles that are in about the craft into those books, but in Perennial Seller, I'm specifically talking about the craft.
Mm.
And not everyone does a craft, right?
Yeah.
So some people work with dogs for a living, or
Mm.
they're a park ranger, and that's a totally different and honorable profession.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to talk. I don't. The other thing is, I don't need everyone to read everything that I've ever written.
Mm.
I want to have produced enough stuff that it's of value to people.
Yeah, that's very, I think, satisfying to hear as someone who's a creator, that you don't have that urge to, first of all, please everyone, but also just, you don't necessarily, it's not your goal that everyone reads your book.
I think it's really important when you're setting out to do a project that you know who you're making it for. If you're making it for everyone, chances are it will be for no one.
Mm.
I have a quote that I like in the book. It's from Jonah Peretti, who's the founder of BuzzFeed, and he's saying that every BuzzFeed post is supposed to go viral, but that doesn't mean it's supposed to do millions of views. If it's a post about things that you remember from 1990, it's by definition not for people who were born in 1997,
Yeah.
right? So the point is they're making things that are supposed to go viral for very specific, definable groups of people.
Yeah.
So again, this book is not for a park ranger unless that park ranger is thinking about writing a book about their experiences, or is also a musician on the side, or has a business making ceramics, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
But perhaps that's not what they're into. And so I try to know who I'm making what I'm making for, so that way I can effectively judge whether I've done it or not. I'm not just hoping.
Yeah. But how do you train yourself? I find when I look at myself, I find it difficult. Sometimes I'm really focused on, a narrow group of people. And then, sometimes like you, I write an article that appeals to maybe a broader group. And then I'm often lured in like, oh wow, a lot of people, read that stuff.
Sure.
And I'm like, oh, I should write more about that. But how do you just train yourself not to think like that?
Well, no, that's a good point. And look, some things are for large groups of people, and that's totally fine. As long as you know that's what you're doing, I think. But yeah, I when I write, I try to ask myself two questions. And I wrote a piece about this a long time ago, but I try to answer two questions, and I try to urge the other writers that I edit or work with to do the same thing. I want to say, who is this for, and how will they find out about it? And if I don't have a good answer to that question, I'm really just throwing it up in the air, and that's probably not a good use of my time.
That's pretty good. I wrote it down. One of the other things that I also really got from your book is just a simple question of what does it do? You can apply it
Yes.
to your book or your product or whatever. It's just, very simple. Like, what does it do?
What does it do,
Yeah.
and does it do it well? If your thing is supposed to make people laugh, well, does it actually do that? If your thing is supposed to, help me get a job, does it actually help me get a job? And really setting out to know, hey, the purpose of my work, the reason people pay for it, is because it does something for them, and you've got to know what that thing is.
So let's talk about the structure of the book, because that's also one of the things that I often look at, is that it's based on, like, the first part is the creative process, then you think about the positioning, marketing, and then building the platform. Is that the first thing that you think about when you start writing a book?
It's not the first thing I think about when I start writing, but it's the first thing I start thinking about when I'm considering a book. Like, I don't write until I've already solved that. I'm not writing a bunch of words and then trying to organize them later. I have to crack the structure of the book, how it's going to be organized, more or less what's going to go in the different sections, why those sections are what they are. Because I'm thinking about the journey that I'm taking the reader or the person on. It's such a big endeavor. You don't like I'll see quotes of my own books sometimes online, and I'll have forgotten that I wrote them, right?
Yeah.
And that's because it's not because it's forgettable necessarily, but it's because I can't memorize 80,000 words or 50,000 words. That's a lot, right? So, but what I do know, all the arguments that I make in the book, and I know what order they come in, and I know why they're in that order. So you can't have this thing in your head at one time. You have to get it outlined and organized, and that's really, really important. And so I do that before I do anything else.
I think that's a great strategy, because if I look at myself or people I work with or talk to, I was just recently, last week, I was talking to a young programmer who does some work for a family business sometime, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this great idea about." I didn't really understand it, but creating a social network of social networks. But the thing is, he already started, and because I was obviously preparing for this interview, and I've read Tim Ferriss's work, and I know that he's also a real advocate of testing and researching things. And I asked him, like, how did you test this idea? And he was like, I didn't do it. And I was like, why did you start working on it? Don't you think that maybe there's a chance that you're wasting your time? And he didn't really get the point. So I was like, I want to ask you as well, because this is also a part of your book about the testing phase, right? Or how do you know something is worth pursuing? And that's also, by the way, nice to tie this in with a question I received from a reader named Leah. She asked if a field is very crowded, like should you even pursue it? That's like one thing is, does it work? How do you test an idea? And then is it even worth pursuing?
Well, I'll start with the second question. So, it's not that competition is inherently bad, but if you're doing something that other people are doing, it's much harder for you to break through, and it's much harder for you to get and develop an audience and to get the credit you deserve. So I'm always thinking, what am I doing and how am I doing it differently than everyone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look, for 2,000 years, people have been publishing books about Stoicism. And in the last 10 years, there's been a number of books published about Stoicism. So I wanted to make something very, very different. And I wanted to write about Stoicism really by mentioning Stoicism as little as possible, right? And that was based on me looking at the market and seeing the other competition and knowing that, hey, if I wanted to break through, I can't do what other people are doing. So really thinking about that is super important. It's not that it's not worth doing, but it's always worth doing differently than everyone else, I would say. And then in terms of testing, yeah, look, the line I've been saying recently is a book should be an article before it's a book, and an article should be a dinner conversation before it's an article. So I'm always trying to shop the ideas around, get feedback. I'm not telling people that's what I'm doing necessarily, but I am hearing and seeing whether it's resonating. I think that's super important. And then in terms of other forms of testing, yeah, I want to write about the ideas. I want to get them out in the world. I just want to make sure that, hey, this is actually something that people are interested in, or that the approach that I am attacking it from is intriguing to people.
What do you think about the, because it reminds me a little bit of, I sometimes watch Shark Tank, and Mark Cuban often says that something like, if a business doesn't exist, or an app or an idea or whatever, like there's a very big chance that people don't give a shit, right?
Yeah.
And, I hear like, and the guy that I was talking to was like, oh, this doesn't exist. And
sure. No, just because on the one hand, competition is validation, right?
Yeah.
Competition shows that there is a established market for that product. And if you go into it, then you're battling yourself for a piece of that market. Maybe you'll get 1%, maybe you'll get 99%, but you're battling for a piece of that market. If there is no established market, you have to make it. But the good news is, if you make it, you might own 100% of it, right?
Yeah.
This is Blue Ocean versus Red Ocean. There's a wonderful book called Blue Ocean Strategy. They have a new version coming out called Blue Ocean Shift that I recommend. But the risk is that you're totally wrong, that this doesn't exist because people don't want it. And that's where the testing does come in. You have to, when I was talking about Perennial Seller, I was thinking about, like, I'll break this out. So I originally sold a book about book marketing, and there's clearly a fairly large market for books about book marketing. There's lots of them published. They have lots of reviews. They sell pretty well. There's lots of courses around this. And, I got lots of questions for it. But I wasn't interested in going head to head with all these people, especially because a lot of them have no business being in that market at all, because they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So I wasn't interested in that. So I decided to go towards this idea of making things that last. That's different. But the reason I felt comfortable pursuing it is that in my many conversations with other artists and creators and aspiring creators, I could see from their reaction that I was onto something. They were making it clear that I landed on something pretty good. So I wasn't doing it in a vacuum.
But did you change the target audience, or was the audience the same?
It's a very similar audience, but it's a different means of getting to that audience. Okay. And I actually think it's a larger audience because not everyone is making a book. I'm writing a book about how to make anything that lasts.
How did you make the decision of focusing on a niche of a small audience, or just going a little bit wider? How did you make the decision? How wide should I go? Should I appeal to everyone who's in business, or just creatives and
Yeah, I wasn't trying to appeal to everyone in business because not everyone is making things, right?
yeah,
So I wanted to zoom in on creators who are making things who are trying to do it differently. Like I'm not
okay,
interested in creators who are in it to make a quick buck, for
okay,
instance, because I don't like that audience and I
yeah.
don't relate to them and I'm not interested in working with them. So I do. It's not just knowing who you're for, but also knowing who you're not for.
And is that also the difference between strategies and tactics? You believe? Because often
Uh,
when you look at these type of books or courses and things that talk about how to make a quick buck, they often talk about really in depth, like email marketing strategies or scripts or like social media things or whatever.
Well, I mean, I think the truth is most of those aren't even tactics. They're just scams. Like they're just lies. I don't think
Yeah,
they work, period.
yeah.
So I was just not interested in being a part of that at all.
But how can we detect those? Because like the internet is it's full of garbage and it's also full of good stuff. But how
Well,
can
look,
yeah
I think one way to look at it is has the person actually in any way done
mm,
what they're talking about?
that's a great one.
Right?
Yeah,
So when you look at a book about book marketing and the only book these people have marketed is
yeah,
their own book,
yeah,
and that book hasn't sold particularly
yeah.
well,
Yeah.
well, that's probably not a great person to take advice
Yeah,
from.
my favorite online courses are the ones that only made money off selling courses about making online courses.
Of course, and look, you got to realize that if courses were so profitable for them, they would be making more courses,
Yeah,
not making more courses about courses.
yeah, exactly. But that's a little bit I find difficult to play the long game. So one of the things that I also want to talk to you about is patience and the story that you share about your the ESPN article about stoicism about
Yep.
obstacle. To me, really just shows the art of patience, and I often tell it to my friends. But it's maybe great for you to just to tell it, like how did it work from, and how long did it take for you to go from book to a massive article in ESPN and getting read by coaches in the NFL and players.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think almost everything is solved by patience. Patience is the magic ingredient in quite a lot of valuable, important things. So I
Yeah,
always try to remember that. But yeah, what happened was, I think, The Obstacle is the Way came out in May of 2014. I started hearing from sports coaches in the late summer, early fall of 2014.
mm,
And I heard from the New England Patriots that they'd read the book. And so I remember standing in an airport watching the Super Bowl and
mm.
watching the New England Patriots win the Super Bowl after they'd read my book. And, you know,
Yeah,
nobody else knew. Like nobody, I was the only, like one of, a handful of people in the world that knew.
yeah,
And, I could have been patting myself on the back. I could have made some, self-indulgent social media posts, but I
yeah,
don't see the value in that. And what I ended up doing was I waited and I was patient and I invested in trying to introduce the book to as many people in sports as possible. I was playing the long game, and eventually the article happened, and it was much bigger than anyone could have expected. I wasn't I wasn't resigned. I
yeah.
wasn't, hey, I'm not going to do anything about it. But I was also not impatient and expecting. I know that a real trend piece takes time to develop.
How can you be so calculated and have that much patience? Like, how did you develop this? Is this your natural tendency, or is it something that you learned?
Look, I don't think it's all that magical or anything. I mean, I guess I've always,
Well, if I look
I
at
actually,
myself, if I were there, I was like, "Hey, everybody has to hear about this." When I was on the airport, right?
I mean, I guess I actually tend to see myself as an impatient person, so it's
Mm,
something I've had to work on and I
yeah,
think about a lot. But I'm just not interested in. I see bragging about stuff on social media
Mm.
or trying to get credit for stuff from, random strangers. I try to see that as a weakness.
Mm.
And so I take pride in resisting it and, sticking to the work and sticking to the things that matter. I try to think about it that way, and it gives me something to aspire and work towards.
Mm. You waited, and your reward was a lot bigger. From
I think
maybe,
so.
yeah,
I think it tends to go that way.
yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, you don't know, right?
You never know.
Yeah,
You never know. It could have not worked. I mean, there was no guarantee of a result either.
yeah.
I think that's something to remember as well. It could have gone the other way.
That's the thing, but you just never know. And but one of the things that you can know is how well your product is. And the first half of the book, you talk about the creative process and creating a product. And one of the things that I still remember from your book, Growth Hacker Marketing, is that you talked about, marketing is more built in the product development phase, right? How does that creative process start for you?
Well, look, at the end of the day, a book sells because somebody recommends it to another person, right? That
Mm,
almost all books sell by word of mouth. If you think about most of the books you buy, it's because, you heard it was good from someone else.
yeah.
And so most of the work that you need to do needs to be on the book itself, or on what you're making. It doesn't have to just be books. But so making something, Paul Graham, he says, the best way to increase his startup's growth rate is to make a product so good that people recommend it to their friends.
Mm,
And so I try to think about that in my books, and I spend a lot of time thinking about how this is going to be used, who is going to use it, what value I'm delivering,
mm,
you know, uh, and I try to make something that sticks with people. If you think about ego as the enemy, I don't think I give. There's not like 7 tips for reducing your ego. It's instead a larger way of thinking about ego that's supposed to stay with you, and
yeah.
that's on purpose.
What's the most important aspect, do you think, in that part? Because I read about getting feedback, for instance,
Hmm.
testing ideas. Um, what is for you personally the most important aspect of getting that creative process right? Or let me reframe it differently. When do you know it's finished?
Well, it never feels finished.
Mm,
It never feels finished. I don't know. I think a lot of these are intuition.
mm,
I probably felt my first book was finished before it really was, and this book I probably had a better sense of when it actually was finished. And I think I got closer to where I was setting out to do. So these aren't magical things that someone can explain and then you get. I think that there's a certain amount of doing to it as
mm.
well. The you know I feel like I get better on each book, and I that's one of the reasons I write lots of books, is that I want to get better at it.
Mm. Is that also your, primary focus, or because you talk about having, real focus instead of just chasing all kinds of opportunities? Is that something that you decided for yourself early on? Like, I'm going to write books. Is that your main thing?
It's what I love. It's what
Yeah,
I think I'm. I think I think it's what I was put here to do.
yeah, and I bet I'm sure that you've had a lot of opportunities to do all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was sort of saying that at the beginning. You get a lot of opportunities to do. If you're good at what you do, you tend to get opportunities to do the opposite of what that is, right? Like
Yeah,
Mitch Hedberg's joke about, if you're a good comedian, they suddenly want you to act.
mm,
And
yeah.
I think you want to be open to new opportunities. You want to go where life takes you, but you also want to make sure that you're spending as much of your life and your energy doing, the things that you actually like to do.
One of the things that a lot of people struggle with is just finding that thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, and look, I don't have good advice for that. I don't know the magical solution to finding your life's task. I do. I mean, an easy way to put it is, what's the thing you would do for free even if they didn't pay you?
Mm,
To me, I like it's like or Paul Graham, I think, has another line where he says it's really hard to be good at things you don't think about in the shower. So what's the thing you find your mind just drifting towards? Like what's the thing that makes you stare out of the car window and just think? And so to me, that's writing. It's always
Mm.
been writing. And there's other things that do that a little bit for me, but this is the main thing for me.
Yeah, what I also really loved was that recently, I think you wrote an article about like don't start a podcast.
Yeah. Don't do the thing that everyone else is doing
Yeah.
just because like look, if your dream is to start a podcast and it's what you really care about and it's the medium that inspires you and
Mm.
you think you're amazing at and that you could deliver a lot of value on, absolutely you should start a podcast. I would never tell you you shouldn't. But if you're starting a podcast because you think it would be good for your business, it's
Yeah.
like, ugh, just save us the trouble. Like just don't waste your time and don't waste our time and don't make the world a worse place by making it.
Yeah, but I think this is such great advice because it's easy to get on with the next idea or the next big thing, right? Um,
Sure.
Instead of just staying on your path and maybe spend a little bit more time on writing the next book or creating the next improvement of your app or whatever it is. One of the things that I wanted to ask you as well is like from start when you start a book, right? Um,
Hmm.
there's a pretty long time between when people actually read it. And in between, you only have the feedback of the people you directly work with, right? How do you deal with that, man? You just,
Well, you have to. There's a couple of things. One, you have to be comfortable with not making good stuff.
mm,
That's a very underrated skill. Like one of the hardest things. Well, one of the easiest things about your first book is that you don't have any other of your own books to compare it to, right?
mm,
But it's really dangerous. Let's say you're on your second book. You're comparing the middle where you are in the middle of the process on your second book with where you were at the end of the process on your first book. And that can be very misleading. You have to remember what things were like when they were half done or raw and unpolished.
mm,
So you have to be comfortable being bad. I think that's part of it. And then I try to break things up into as many small pieces as possible. So I'm not thinking about whether the book is good. I'm thinking about whether the intro is as good as I can make it at this point.
mm.
And then the first half of chapter one so breaking it up into pieces makes it much more manageable for me.
A lot of these things that maybe they sound obvious, right? But you just have to you really have to do it. That's one of those things that I really enjoy about your work is that there's this theme that often comes back, and is this that you just have to put in the work. I think when you repeat it often and you demonstrate it with examples, and you can just look at your own career. You've applied everything that you talk about. You're now at a good position. But at the same time, I think it's also real difficult to when you're sitting at home. This is what I often get questions about. This is that who am I, right? Who am I to speak about a certain topic? Or there are already millions of bloggers or writers or products. Who am I to put out something? What would you say to those people?
There's a quote from Marcus Aurelius that I like where he says, like, look, if it's humanly possible, then you can do it. I like to think about it that way. It's like, look, who are you? Why shouldn't you be able to make something if you feel like making it?
Mm,
But you should hold yourself to a really high standard if you're going to do it. So, I think what you find when you read really great work, or you see really great artists do what they do, or entrepreneurs or whatever. On the one hand, you should be humbled,
mm.
because it's impressive and amazing that they're able to do this. And on the other, you should be inspired because they're not that different than you. Well, at least that's what I try to take from it.
Yeah, that's a great mindset to have, I think. And just real quickly, say, I want to start a book. How long would you spend time on testing and working out the ideas before you start actually writing it?
Well, it's less like oh, I'm going to write a book. It's more of a process that develops. Like you keep thinking about this idea and that idea, and it sort of becomes it becomes a book over time. You don't go, I want to write a book. What should I write a book about? It's that I think it's better that there is no way I can't not write this book. So that process could be a week. That process could be a year. It's this thing that's developing over time. That's the process.
I also had a question from Gina about personal life. She was
Okay.
wondering how much of your time you spend with your wife and kid because you recently became a father.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I can.
Yeah.
The nice part about writing from home is that you get to, or working from home is that you get to walk into the next room and they're there. So I spend a lot of time with them. I try to spend an hour in the morning. He and I go for a long walk,
Mm.
and we, I try to see him as much as I humanly can. I think to me that success is not having to spend a ton of time away from my family. So to me that's part of success.
The question about how much time you spend with your kid, maybe we can reverse it. Like, how much time do you spend working?
As much as I can as well. I mean, it's my favorite. It's my favorite, or
Yeah.
my next to my favorite thing in the world. So
So you don't have.
like I don't have like these are my hours.
All right, man. That was great. Thanks for the information about marketing. Perennial Seller is out now. I will link to your email list, your newsletter with a book recommendation. Is one of my favorite ones. I always check it
Oh,
out every
thank you.
month. Is there anything else that you would like to share with people, or where they can find you, or read more about you, or
No, no,
yeah?
thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for being on the show, and take care.